Okay, just to start off then, I'm going to say that I'm using the Atom program to code my website and our Django project. Atom is open source. It's made by the guys at GitHub, and there's a lot of add-ons to it that just sort of helps us out a lot. So I'm going to say, obviously you can use any text editor, you can use Sublime or whatever. I prefer this. And I'm going to start off by creating a folder. So in my computer, I'm going to go into a folder where I just keep some sample Django apps, and I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this one Year 12 project. You know what, let's make that shorter. Year 12 proj. And what I want to do is I want to create my project within this folder. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to drag it into Atom. So now what it's done is put the project folder there, so everything will appear here, yeah. And what I want to do now is I want to create a Django project. Now one of the first things you're going to have to do is you're going to have to install Python if you haven't already. Okay, so when you install Python, installing it also installs it installs a function that enables you to install more add-ons into your Python application. So namely, once you've installed Python into your computer, you're going to want to install a virtual environment so that everything that we create for our websites, and because you might create several websites, you want them to be contained in their own sandboxes, because they'll have their separate add-ons and separate applications that you want to add on. And sometimes when you're working from one project to another, you might want actual different software versions. So you might want to write a program using Python 2 or Python 3, or maybe an older version of Django, or an older version of some Python library that you don't want to be system wide. So what we're going to use is we're going to use the function called pip install, and we're going to say virtual env. On my system it's already installed, so it's probably not going to work. It's probably going to say that I don't need it. Yep, it says requirement is already satisfied, so I don't need that. But obviously when you do it, it will install virtual environment for the first time. So I'm going to close that, and I'll take you back into Atom. Okay, so the next thing I do is, in my Atom app, I use something called, if I just show you, let's go to settings and let's go to packages, and I installed an app from Atom called Platformio IDE Terminal, which basically means it allows me to run that terminal or the command prompt. It doesn't matter whether you're using Windows, Linux or Mac. It enables me to run it straight from Atom here. So by doing this, I'm now running a command prompt, and because I've got that folder open, it's actually opened the command prompt inside that directory, so inside that folder that I created here. So inside here now, the next thing I want to do is I want to create a virtual environment. So to do that, I'm going to start off by saying virtual env, and I'm just going to call my virtual environment my env. It doesn't have to have a special name. So what that does now is that starts to run, create that virtual environment, and it's telling me it's creating it inside my Year 12 project folder. Okay, so now it's done that. Now I need to activate that. So if I go back to my folder here, you can see that inside my Year 12 project folder is created a virtual environment with the sort of scripts that I need to run Python. So it's got a Python environment here that's inside my folder. So what I need to do is activate that. So inside scripts, I need to run the activate app. To do that, I'm just going to run it straight from here. So I'm just going to say my env / scripts. Oops, I spelled that wrong. / scripts / activate, and you can see here at the moment at the beginning of my the trading character is a D. So let's say once I click on enter, it now says that. So I've got that in brackets, my env, which lets me know that I'm now working inside a virtual environment. So whatever I do now, whatever I install, is not whole system wide. It's contained within this virtual box, this little sandbox that we've created inside this folder. So now this is activated. Right, now what I want to do then is I want to create my Django project. So I can't remember. Oh yeah, obviously the Python environment's installed. I've now got to install Django. So I'm going to say pip install Django. And what this will do is this will install the latest version of Django inside that virtual environment. So like I said, obviously I've got a firewall running, so it stops. Right, so it's now installed Django for me. So my next step then is I've got to create a Django project. So now what's happened is inside my virtual environment, inside the scripts and the libraries, etc. Actually, where is it? I'm not quite sure. There we are. It's installed my Django app within the scripts folder of my virtual environment. But I don't, so I'm not going to muck around with that. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a new folder here, a project, which will run from its own folder. So we're going to say Django -admin, and we're going to say start project, one word, and I'm going to call the project, let's just call it project for it's like a year 12 programming project demo. Okay, so again my firewall's going to go crazy. Okay, so that's finished. And again, if we check that, so now we have a second folder. So outside of that we have another folder, and this now is our Django project. So just to take you through some of these files, you don't really need to know too much. So what we have here is this file is a created Python file, which is going to be used by Django to run a whole bunch of to run a bunch of commands. Inside that, what we have now is we have in fact, let's run it through using here. So inside this folder, what we have now inside the programming folder is we have the settings for our project, and we have something called URLs, and the other files we don't really have to worry about too much. Okay, so these are just files that sort of the project needs to run. It is all the background stuff that's done for you. You don't have to worry about it. So the two important files that you need to worry about right now are the URLs file, which I'll take you through in a second, and the settings file, which will go into more detail later as well. So let's start with running the project, so you just see what it's done so far. So here I'm going to say I've got to make sure I'm in the right folder, so I'm going to say cd, and it was called programming project. So oops, I spelled it wrong. So now when I run that, it's put me inside this folder here. Okay, sorry, this folder. So what that means is it can see this folder and it can see that file. And if I was to do this, so if I say dir nw, you can see that what it's looking at is it can see the folder and it can see that file called manage.py. And like I said, this manage.py file runs a bunch of functions and commands. So I'm going to get it to run something for me. I'm going to say manage.py run server. So now that I've done that, again my firewall's asking me for permissions. Your one might not be that tight. What it's done is inside this virtual environment, it's run a server, and it's running that server. So if I want to access it, I'm going to copy that. So at this web address, I can now access this website project that I've now created. So let's open up this and tap that in, and you can see here that we've got a working website at that address. Okay, so this is it. It just lets me know that my Python, so my Django website installation is worked and the website's up and running. Okay. If we go to the URLs file now. The URLs file is kind of like, these are what we call URL patterns. So in Django, what happens is you tell Django what paths exist, so that, and I'll explain in a second, I'll show you with a diagram. Here you can see that there's a path called admin, which links to something called admin site.urls. So Python has got a built-in, sorry, Django has got a built-in admin app. So there's an app that already exists that has all the admin stuff to do with running this website, and we'll go through that in a minute. But I'll show you on the browser. So for example, now this is my website. So if I was to say /admin, it will take me to an admin page, a login page. Now I haven't configured my admin username and password yet, so I'm going to leave that for now. I'll come back to it in a bit. But just so you know, so this is basically, we're saying what paths exist. So when I create another one now, for example, it could be path, and it could be something like, well, I could leave it blank for home page, or I could say, I don't know, whatever pages I have. I'm going to list those pages here, and we'll go through that in a bit. Okay, now this image is not mine. I did borrow it from the web. So to give my source, it's a website called Django Easy Tutorial Blogspot, and I just pulled it from Google. So so you know it's not my image. So the way it works is, when we're using a browser, so let's say I was using Chrome, or I was using what was the other one, Internet Explorer. When I type in an address in the address bar, what happens is I send a request. So when you hit enter, you send a request to Django, and Django checks if that URL exists. If that URL does exist, then it runs a function, and we'll talk about that in a minute. It runs a function that we're going to write. It processes what's supposed to happen when that function is run. It creates a view, and then it renders it as a HTML page that comes back out onto the screen. Now the interesting thing is when it runs that function and it renders the HTML page that we see in return, we can also apply something called a template. And templates are an amazing way that we sort of make our design for our sites. We render the HTML in that template, and then we respond, so we send it back to the page. So what that basically means is, if I was to go back to here, what's happened is, when I typed in admin here, so let's go back to the home page. So what's happened is, it's checked, the URL takes me straight to this. If I was to change the URL and add something else in, like admin, what's going to happen is, it's going to send that request as I typed it in. It's going to go to check in that Python URLs file. So that was here, that URL patterns file. It's going to check if a pattern exists with the extension admin. If it does exist, it tries to find a function called admin. Now the functions we're going to see, because in this homepage part, in this project part, we don't have a views file. We're going to create that in a second. So it will look for a function in a file called views, and then it will return, it will process that, and it will return it according to a template. At the moment I don't have a template. This is Django's built-in template. So we're going to go through that in a second.